Can Yumi get a hard CC back on the ultimate? She's going the only support mage that doesn't have a hard CC. That is unlikely. We took a lot of stuff off Yumi to make sure that she is not all that useful for really good players. And so if you're like, she doesn't have hard CC, it's like, yeah, she doesn't necessarily need hard CC. You say she's the only support mage without hard CC. I would say she's the only support mage that can go untargetable permanently. And so when you can go untargetable permanently, there's, you know, a number of things you potentially aren't allowed to do to make up for that. So I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable that she doesn't have hard CC. If we were to buff her, we probably should just, you know, buff up her numbers or something like that. You say it's unfair that Yumi is untargetable, but at the same time, Riot removed Bop and Block passive from Yumi, which was the only reason to jump on her for AD carry, making it possible to kill her. So why not bring back a variation of that and restore her hard CC? So I didn't not say Yumi is... It's I don't think I said that it's unfair that Yumi is untargetable. I just said Yumi is untargetable. And the reason I said Yumi is untargetable is because Yumi is untargetable. That is a true statement about Yumi, and that comes with weaknesses. Right? Like, if you're good at this thing, you have to be worse at other things. We'll start with that, right? This happens with AD carries. You could be like, why doesn't Jinx have a dash? Kai'Sa has one, Lucian has one, that's not fair. And so like, well, Jinx has 725 range. The statement isn't, it's unfair that Jinx has 725 range. The statement is more, Jinx has 725 range. And certain things have to give with that range. And so, in Jinx's case, part of it is not having a dash. So then the second part of your statement, though, is like, well, hey, you had something that made her targetable. It was the passive. Why'd you remove that? Put it back on. Add the skill expression. Yumi had a very big problem that she actually had far too much skill expression. I know it's ironic. People look at Yumi and they're like, wait, skill expression? But like legitimately the best Yumi players in the world were challenger players and pro players. And you saw this because of how powerful she was in challenger and pro. It turns out that there's a lot of like really wild optimizations you could do with old Yumi in regards to switching targets, hopping on and off, things like that. And the problem with that is twofold. Number one is it turns out that when Yumi has a ton of skill expression, she becomes very unbalanceable for pro play, and it's not a very good look for a character like her to be one of the best supports you could be playing in pro and high MMR. But then on top of that, the second problem with it is that most of the people who play Yumi are not at all interested in that type of skill expression. Most of the people who play Yumi are not playing Yumi to hop on and off their targets, constantly putting themselves at risk to optimize a shield passive. That is not what Yumi players are interested in on the most part. The majority of Yumi players want to ride around on their friend and cast spells. And so we adjusted Yumi to remove optimizations, like the optimization of hopping on and off, in order to ensure that she was A, not broken or unbalanced in pro or high elo anymore, which was successful, and at the same time, her power was more focused onto the things that the people who mained Yumi were interested in being good at, which is more like riding around on someone, casting Qs, things like that. And so in regards to Yumi, skill expression in terms of hopping on and off of someone was probably not the best place for her to have those things. Like, Yumi isn't a character that is necessarily about skill expression. It's similar to, like, you know, if we changed Sona, we could give her skill shots, but that wouldn't be really what Sona is about, even if it added skill expression to the character. Do you see what I'm getting at here? It's like different characters have different needs for skill expressions and different ways to express it based on what their players would prefer. And in Yumi's case, the majority of Yumi players aren't really picking that character to have these like large optimizations of skill expression around hopping on and off their person. They just kind of stay on their person. And so the rework, basically, the attempt at the rework, which I think it was resoundingly successful at, by the way, was, hey, there's Yumi players who just want to ride around on their friend, and there's Yumi players who are really, really good at optimizing, hopping around and auto attacks and things like that. The Yumi players who want to ride around on their friend don't get to have fun because she has to be balanced around the Yumi players who are doing all these optimizations and making pro play and high elo like fairly unplayable in a lot of situations because of how powerful that was when you actually optimized her. And so we wanted to take away those high MMR optimizations and focus more on like what the core fantasy of the character was for like the majority of people who played her. There's a concept called, what is the word here? I'll call it player types, but I think I'm using the wrong word. One of the things that the game design community has like started to understand over time is that there's different types of players in terms of player preferences, and it's not just like guys like a thing, girls like a thing, or whatever, right? It's more like based on who you are, you're going to have different preferences for how you play a game and the things in games that you really enjoy. So as an example, there's groups of players that are called collectors. And what do collectors like? They like collecting lots of things. And so when they go into a game, they might play the game because there's just so many things to grab. So this is the person in Genshin who maybe runs around and like tries to get all the spires and all the anemo crystals. This is the person who plays Super Mario and tries to get every single star and every single coin, things like that, right? And like that's a player type. And it turns out, surprise, surprise, that not everybody who plays games likes collecting shit. It turns out there's other people who very much aren't collectors, and when they see like I have to get 100 stars, they're like, I could care less about getting 100 stars. I'll get enough stars to go to the next level. They might be something like, say, competitors. A group of players competitors is like what they're doing, what they enjoy about games is having like a really competitive experience where they can show their skills, sometimes against other people, right? There's a lot of competitors who love playing League of Legends, as an example. There's a group of players who are explorers. Explorers are the people who like the vistas and points of interest and whatnot in MMOs are made for, right? There's a number of people who like when they play an MMO, what they want to do is just run around the map and see new things. They're like, I want to go there and go to the top of the mountain and see what's at the top of the mountain, right? Whereas, other players who play MMOs, they're like, why would I go to the top of that mountain? There's no raid dungeon up there. There's no gear up there. Like, I could care less, right? And the note I'm trying to make here is just kind of like, if you're thinking about playing a game and being a gamer who plays games, right? Remember that you have certain preferences. And so you should ask yourself, like, what are you? Are you a collector? Are you a dominator? Are you a explorer? Are you an achievement hunter? You just like finding achievements? And when you see in a game a system and you're like, why would anybody play that game or like that system? Something that's always worth asking yourself is, maybe the system's just bad, or maybe the system isn't for you. Maybe the system is focused on a different group of players and their preferences. An example of this for me is, I could care less about achievements. Like, I do not care about achievements at all. I never even think about them when I play any game. But obviously, like, almost every game that comes out has achievements. Now, I used to be like, back in the day, like when I was just, 16, I'd be like, why do games have achievements? Like, no one likes achievements. But really, in the reality, it wasn't no one likes achievements. It was I didn't like achievements. And then eventually I kind of like realized, especially once becoming a game dev, it was just like, oh, actually, there's a ton of people who freaking love achievements. There's a ton of people who like achievements are a major motivator for them to playing a game. And so it's actually really good if you're making a game to have achievements, even if they aren't for everybody. Because there's going to be a subset of your players who freaking loves them. And so, yeah, just think about that. If you're making games, like, what are the player preferences that you're trying to serve? And then if you're playing games and you're seeing systems that maybe you don't like, ask yourself, like, is there some other group of players who this is trying to serve that maybe just isn't you? It's always worth thinking about. Like self-awareness. I mean, we're all NPCs out here.